morning about server-side rendering of JavaScript in PHP. So my name is Ignacio Martín, or Ignacio. I'm Spanish, but I live in Munich. I work in a company called Limenius, and we make projects for customers, whatever they require help with. And we are very happy users of last year's React and Symfony. And we have been looking for ways to tighten the integration between PHP and JavaScript better. And we have, as a result, published some libraries. So as I said, our work has been done mostly in React and Symfony. So the libraries are written for Symfony and React. But as we will present the also basic like building blocks of how this works. So maybe if you are using exactly this stack, you may use the libraries. Or if you are using, for instance, Vue or Laravel, other stuff, you may maybe take the ideas or maybe build your own libraries or something like that. But we will present how this works. So let's start by saying what's the problem that server-side rendering addresses. Because it's not something that any project in the world needs, but I think it's important for some projects, and also it's a nice tool to have in mind if you may require it, because some people, I feel that they discard architectures just because of this, and for me it doesn't make so much sense to throw away many resources just because of this. So the problems we are solving now are always because the way problems were solved in the past. So solutions in the past create problems for the future. So let's start to see how were things and why did we arrive to this point. So this is like the first web page. And from the first web page, you see something that is important. The goal of the web was not to have everything that we have now, but to provide access to documents. So it was document oriented. So people can access documents that they were looking for. And that was the main goal, and was done perfectly for this goal. So as you know, this is the basic setup for a server serving an HTML file, and the client takes this HTML file and presents the user interface to the user. But then this model like won to every other competitor, and it was perfect and scalable, but we have problems as the first time we want to extend it. Like things like this, we have a form, and sometimes we want to have the information to provide an interaction to the user. So if the user makes something, does something, we can react to what they do. Like, for instance, if they write only 4 characters, we can say, okay, your password is not long enough. So in order to do this, we started to enhance the web experience by serving as well some JavaScript, some code that, based on the information that you have in the first load, you can still react somehow to the user. Then how we were used to this at the beginning, or even some years ago, lastly with jQuery. I think jQuery it's well known for everyone. So typically what we do is document object model manipulation, like in this case to add a class to an element in the page. So now we can somehow interact, do something, change how the page looks. But what about loading new content that we don't know in the first request? Maybe we want to load new content from the server and use it to change the contents in the page. Then, like for instance, this is a typical example of we have a paginated list. Maybe you are selling houses, and then you want to go to the second page. Then you want to maybe reload the page, or maybe not. Maybe you can just grab the data and display it. So for this, we can put an API as well, and then grab the data, like in JSON or XML, and the client knows how to manipulate the document object model to showcase these changes. So this works typically in jQuery, for instance, with load or get from a URL, and we have a function here, render page, that takes this data and modifies the document object model somehow. Okay, so the document object model is something that is, you know, the HTML goes to the client, and the client builds this tree of components. This tree is expensive to build. It's something that typically we don't want to build in the server side. So, but browsers are very good at this, particularly some browsers. And so in the first load, we get the HTML, and the browser just represents this, builds this tree, has this tree, and that this is what is presented to visually to the user. Then, if we make an API call, we typically what we say is just take this element grid away, wipe it out, present probably a loader or something the user may be waiting for the second page, and then we have this function render page that will say, okay, I have this data, and I put it here. I build this tree, I change this tree. And that was the nice days of document object model manipulation. The problem is that if you want to provide information in a first load, you have some templating mechanism or PHP in the server side to build this HTML, and that's what the browser will use. And then we have the same process, the same mechanism, but different, written in JavaScript to create this tree. So as soon as your application is complex enough and this rendering is not so easy, you will have to do the work twice. And this is, for most projects, unfeasible and very annoying and bug prone. So the solution that in some applications was applied is to just not render the content in the first page load and just present a loader. Like, for instance, Gmail has been doing that forever. You just say loading Gmail, or many applications do that. And then when the API call, the first API call is done, we just render these elements and we present finally the data to the user. This is working, and you can take profit of every JavaScript library in the world, the more advanced or whatever. But of course, the first thing the user sees is a spinner, is a loader. And also, this is a problem for search engine optimization because also crawlers see this, also Facebook sees this if you want to, the meta tags and so on, to share the content. So this is problematic. But for some uses, it's okay. Also, for mobile users, this is a study from Google from 1 year and a half ago, but I guess it's still relevant for not so fast connections. The average load time for 3G is 19 seconds. This is a study made for the advertising DoubleClick brand, so it's more adapted to people who are making money with advertising, where this is a big problem. So if a page takes longer than 3 seconds, 53% of them are abandoned, which is a lot. And if you can manage to go from the first render of content from 19 seconds to 5 seconds means, well, like 25% more impression of ads, 70% longer sessions, like big numbers, 35% lower bounce rate, and at the end, double the money, which is, well, it's a big number. But still, so we saw a bifurcation of the web. Some cases you can consider, I have an app, I have an application. For instance, we have a customer who has a medical application, and in this case, you can just present a loader. It's not a problem, because they are doctors and they will spend the whole day with this application. They don't care if the application takes some seconds to present the first render. That's perfectly okay. So in this case, we don't care at all about this. Or Gmail, for instance, doesn't care about this, even when Google is pushing for this. But then we have the other side of the wall, which is content pages, what the web was designed for, where probably this is unfeasible. So you have this duplication of worlds where some of them have a loader and they are using the best technologies in JavaScript, and some of them just say, we cannot do that, and we just stick with what we have and try to make it better, but yeah, the speed is important for us. So this was the problem. And let's take this, like, this was a problem that was like, we have to live with this problem. And we will see how this problem was solved. Because this problem was solved not by directly going against this problem, but as a side effect of the new generation of libraries. So this is a problem because we are doing document object manipulation, and the new generation of libraries like React or Vue are more based in state-based. They are state-based. So you work with a state, and the library renders it for you. What does it mean? And so we see also a bit of these libraries. Imagine the simplest case. We want to build like the typical tutorial of one of these libraries. We want to build a to-do list. And typically in these projects, you want as a feature that the user can insert an item not, in the middle. So when you insert the third item, the fourth will go down, and that only 2 items are affected. But if you have 1,000 of them, you have to care which ones are affected or not. So in order to do this, we have 2 options. First is I focus in my state. I have an array of elements, a list of elements, and I will take care of, based on the user interactions, to manage this state, which is done with this very unit test table. It's a very nice problem to work with. It's simple. It's a nice environment. And then what I do is to clean everything, to clean the list, and just repaint it, re-render. So this is not efficient, so at the end we cannot do it because the user is the king, and even if we like our work, if it's just flickering, it's not something we can do. So we have the second option that was what we had to do, which is then, when we have our state, find in the document object model which elements are affected, and then move them, manipulate them, change classes, and so on, like we are doing in Backbone, for instance, or jQuery, typical jQuery work. This is complex to work with. It's error-prone. It's annoying to do this. But at the end, it's efficient, so we have to do it. So these new libraries, like React, what they give to us is that they allow us to focus on the state, focus in the business, and they do the second point behind the scenes. They will do the document object manipulation in an efficient way without us caring about exactly having a document object model. So the fundamental premise of these libraries, especially React, is give me a state and a render function that you know that can represent every possible combination of state that depends on it, and I will call it for you. When I feel like I need to re-render, I will do it, and I will do it efficiently. So let's just see, for the sake of a very, very short introduction of how the code looks, in this case. Let's write this component. So we have a counter. When the user clicks in a button, we see the counter increasing. So the full code in React that does this is this code. We have something to point out. So this is how you build the initial state, which is the king of this component. It's just a JavaScript object. And then you provide some functions to change this state, to provide new versions of the state. Not directly modifying, but providing new versions of the state. And then we provide a render function that if you look at it, we never call it directly. It's React, the one who will call it. We don't know even when will happen, how often, we don't know anything about this, but we provide a way to represent this state. And then this calls the function when the user presses the button, and this works. So state and render are important here. So working with the state means having an initial state and also assigning or making new versions of the state. If you take care of this, you are 50% done. And then if you provide a render function, then you have like quite a lot of work done. This is like kind of a templating language. It's JS6. It's not HTML directly, so we are not directly taking this HTML and inserting it into the page. But React will do some transformation of it into JavaScript, and then we'll be smart about how to change the elements in there. There is a lot of things that go on here with diffing and so on. So the good practice here about the render function that I see also when people try server-side rendering is to make render as clean as possible. So only do this. So it means we don't modify the state in render, or we don't make API calls, which is maybe obvious, but when you are starting, you don't know where to put the code, and you see a function in there, and I see people trying to put, I don't know where it goes, so I must go into render. Well, if you don't know where it goes, it never goes into render. On render, it's kind of a pure function that just displays a templating. Or we don't make crazy things like this and sending emails here. So, and also, we can have Vue or in React components hierarchy. This is like we are doing a short introduction of this, and with this, I think you have quite a lot of React. So you have this component, we split it in subcomponents, and how they communicate with each other. So they communicate also with passing state. So this is like the parent component. We'll have 2 counters now, and it will pass a name, because now the counter has a greeting like, hi, hi man, hi amigo. So the counter can access these variables that we pass to them. So name will be accessed like these props. Props is a word we will see in this presentation a lot. Is a state that comes from the parent. We don't modify it, but we have access to it. And that's it, more or less how React works, is the main idea. But the important thing is that as everything depends on the state, we can reproduce states, we can time travel, we can do a lot of nice things with it, or log changes, and there is a bigger consequence for us, which solves the problem that we were talking about. As we are not touching the document object model, we can just say React, instead of touching the document object model, just give me an HTML string that represents the component with this state that I passed to you. So that's why these libraries work this way, and some other libraries cannot do it. So this is what means server-side rendering. We can exploit this feature to make the initial page load. So in the first page load, we pass HTML with the string embedded in it, the JavaScript that we said render to this component to a string. And then in subsequent calls, by using the same JavaScript code, we can make calls to the API and update the state, but only with the same code base. So in React, this means we have this function, render to string, an element. So give me this element as a string. And then in the client side, so when the JavaScript loads in the browser, you will see that the component is already there. We can say, don't render it, but hydrate it. So it means that make the events work. So take control over this piece of HTML code. So render to string builds a HTML. Can be bigger or whatever, but it's an HTML string. And then we can insert it in our template that we build with twig or whatever. We insert it. And then we have to tell React, OK, this element root is the same component that you want to render now. So just take control over it. So in Vue is similar. We have the same kind of functions, render to string. In this case, render to string is returning a callback, but works mostly the same way. And this is a Vue component. It's different, but I mean, the ideas are what are important here. You have a state, and you have a kind of a render function or a way, so the library knows what to render. So this is the main point. So for instance, Angular has Angular Universal. If you look at for server-side rendering, if you look at the documentation for Angular 4, not Angular 1, they always will say, as long as you don't do document object manipulation, you will be OK. So if a new library appears next week, if it's depending on the state and it's kind of managing the rendering itself, that will be probably OK for doing server-side rendering. If it depends on manipulating the document object model, it will probably break in server-side rendering. This is also important, for instance, when we have a page, and then we are starting with React, and then we have my React component, and someone decides that we want, for instance, insert D3 or a text editor in there, which we see there is a package called React, for instance, CK editor, which is kind of a bridge between an older library or a library that is manipulating the DOM. But as we see that it's a React library, because it can be used in React, then we try to put in there, and it will break server-side rendering, because at some point it will try to manipulate the document object model, and it won't work. So it's always the fundamental premise which works here. So this won't work. And then let's see how to do this in PHP in an efficient way. We have several options. Well, first is, why should I do this? Because if you look at tutorials of server-side rendering, they are almost every time in server-side rendering in Node.js, okay? Because they are tutorials. So in a tutorial, the easiest way or to showcase this concept is just to have the same language, and Node.js is more natural. But we have been publishing this. We have published this library for some years, and you find when you talk to people, why are you using this? They always have cases that are not typical cases of tutorials. Like, for instance, a typical case is that the project already exists, and someone spent money on it, which is typical in the real world. And then you find all sorts of situations that maybe they want to do A/B testing and see if they want to go for React, and they want to do it with one component, for instance. And for this A/B testing, they don't want to change all their architecture to this. Or sometimes you find that they want this component in React, but they have invested like lots of money in this other form that is also in the page, which is where the money goes, like the selling form, and they have written like 100, I think it was 200 templates in Twig, complex templating for dealing with all the cases of the sale, for instance. And yeah, you cannot just take this and put into Node.js. It's like, well, we spend so much resources and this is working well. Why should do this just because of server-side rendering? Or maybe we can combine these Twig components with. There are many cases, depending on the project, will be something or some or another, or you just want to maintain the same architecture, or your people is expert in PHP, but not so comfortable with Node.js, and you don't want to make this big change. And all these cases have in common that they are from the real world. So in the real world, things are more complex than tutorials, and we need sometimes stuff that is not the simplest stuff. Although this solution is not so complicated, but at least involves you to know to have PHP in the server and JavaScript in the browser as well, of course. So what do we need to do this? First, we need, typically we had JavaScript like in several files, and we load them in the page. We will need to build a bundle with all the JavaScript files or all the assets. Typically, we do this with Webpack. There are other tools like Rollup or something, but Webpack is like the standard now. So with Webpack, we combine our assets into a big, or should be small, but typically it's big, JavaScript file. And then we typically, in server-side rendering, we need another configuration that produces a slightly smaller. We can use the same one, but typically you want to have a different configuration to have a server-side JavaScript application. And then with this, you have always to, when you explore the options, to have in mind that what we are going to do every request is we have our library, which is like some hundreds of kilobytes typically, that won't change from request to request. And having this being interpreted by the JavaScript compiler, we will say for every request, now we want to render this, this component with this state. Like I want the first page of results with this filtering and so on. And this is typically just a few bytes. So ideally, we should only make JavaScript compile or make the interpretation of this pink component here, pink block, which is only a few bytes. So options. Let's first see how this is typically presented when we are not doing it in PHP. When we are using PHP as an API and we put Node.js in the front, this is like a typical example in tutorials. We have a Node.js front, and we relegate our PHP to an API, which will just produce data in JSON or XML. So this will have the server-side JavaScript application, the component and a state, and we'll call PHP for the data, and with this, it can produce the first rendering. And then for subsequent renderings, we call the API, and since this JavaScript application in the client side has the same code, it will do it. Then, in PHP, things we can do. So the most simple way, the most naive way, which is slow, I advanced to you, is to just fire up Node.js, like we will do in a terminal, just a fork, and pipe our full application and the component we want to render to Node.js. This is nice for probably for development, and it's very simple. If you have Node.js, it will work. Problem with this is slow. So, like we have, we'll see here links to libraries we have been writing. So this library will deal with the forking and so on of the process and how it works and managing the JavaScript client bundle, server bundle. But so if you try and say, oh, this is slow, of course it's slow because you are doing the work, too much work every request. There is a second option. There is a PHP extension called V8JS that embeds the V8 JavaScript engine, which is the same JavaScript engine virtual machine that works in Chrome or in Node.js. And this is very nice work. It's an extension that you can call, you can say inside of PHP, just give me the result of this JavaScript code. This, if in the first versions of if you don't go very deep into the documentation, will have also the same problem that you will pass server side and the component we want to render to every request. But still, it's a small improvement. But the nice thing that it has, from I think 1 year, 1 year and a half, this extension is that we can also take snapshots. So we can say, I want to freeze the state of this virtual machine. So I will send, I will just preserve it from requests with a cache mechanism. And then I will use it for the next request from JavaScript server application. We take a photo here. And in the next request, we just send the component and the state. And this is quite fast, because we are caching the server-side JavaScript application, which doesn't change between requests. So this is fast. The problem that has this approach, as much as I like this project, is that it's hard to sometimes to find packages for it. So there are Ubuntu packages, but they were Mac packages, but they somehow they are not in there anymore. I don't know if they are discontinued or what happens. Docker images are hard to build because you have to build like the V8 and you have then to build the extension. And for me, it's like I don't particularly enjoy doing this work. And I find myself like when I try this approach, spending so much time into this. So if you really like, for instance, Docker setups and so on, this will be a perfect option, but you have to have in mind that you have to spend some time working with this. But if you can just publish for the world, that will be awesome as well. Then, I don't care so much because there is a third option that works very well as well, which is to invert the roles of PHP and JavaScript. So instead of having PHP as an API, we have it in the front, and we have a dummy server, kind of a worker, that has nothing to do with our business. So it doesn't mean that you have to code your domain or your model in JavaScript, but it's just a dummy server that is in charge of rendering components. So you have this listening to a Unix socket, and it has the server-side JavaScript application loaded, and then you send every time the component and the state, and this is also works pretty fast and pretty well. This is also used not in PHP, but in Ruby, the same setup for Egghead, for instance, the tutorial platform. So this is an external load server, which is like kind of 100 lines of code, not very smart about it. You can, of course, put layers of caching and so on, but it's something you can reuse between projects and yes, works pretty well. Then, about the libraries, if you want to have a look or you want to see how to maybe structure, if you want to build your own libraries for different setups and so on. So we built some libraries. phpexecjs is a library that allows you, outside of the context of server-side rendering, to execute arbitrary code in JavaScript. Maybe it's just a function. You want to add up two numbers in JavaScript for some reason. It will select the best runner you have. So it will select Node.js if it's available, but it will prefer if you have the extension V8JS, and it will take use of this snapshot mechanism. It's built for you, so you don't have to do it again. Or you can provide your own runners if you want to configure it more, or you can, because there are more runners in JavaScript that we don't use, but they're in there, so you can do it. If now, in the context of React rendering, but can also be applied to Vue rendering, ReactRenderer has the ability to use phpexecjs or to use this setup with external render. So to write to Unix sockets and communicate with this Node Express server that is saying, I have this JavaScript application and I want the representation in HTML of this component. And then we have a bundle, which is the integration with Symfony, which is not very big, just because in Symfony it's easy when you have a bundle to just configure everything with YML. It's the thing that it's doing. So it's registering services and wiring things, and so you write the minimum there. Not very important, but useful. So the usage is easy. Well, they are twig extensions. ReactRenderer is a twig extension. So we just say which renderer we want to use. In this case, for instance, phpexecjs for options 1 and 2. And we configure the extension, and we add the extension to twig, and now we can use this extension. Or option 3 is the same, but instead of saying where is, in the previous case was where is my server bundle of JavaScript, we say where is the socket where we want to communicate with, but it's only a matter of how to build the object. And then there is a JavaScript part, which will communicate with these other parts to expose the components. So the nice thing about this is that we share this problem with all the other languages of the web that are not JavaScript. They have the same problems. And so there is a very nice solution from the world of Ruby on Rails. And their JavaScript side of the code doesn't depend on Ruby on Rails, it's in JavaScript. It's still called React on Rails, because it's the name they have, but we can use it in PHP, and it's very, very nice work. So this is, like, for instance, used by many projects. It's like a head or something like that. It's built by this person, which is from Hawaii. As you see, I kind of feel like he's from Hawaii from the photo. And with this, although the library is good work inside, the usage is simple. It's very easy to use. We just say, I want to register this component. This is my component. And in Twig, we can, after this, we can just say, now render this component with this initial state. And this will provide the, provide the templating. So it will provide the HTML representation. And also it will take care of hydrating when we are back in the browser loads the JavaScript code. So it's dynamic, not only server-side rendering, but also dynamic after the page load. There is one thing also that is nice, that supports the bundles and the libraries and also React on Rails. That is, if you are using Redux, Redux is a state manager. So typically, as we saw, the components have its own state. But we can also use, or in combination, a store, which is kind of a global state manager, which is wonderful. By the way, it's a very nice piece of code. And then components take pieces of this state and can use it. So it simplifies our life when working with server-side rendering, because we can just say store with this initial state, and all the components will take the state and use it. So in Ruby on Rails, in React on Rails, this is JavaScript. We say register the store and register the component, and if the component uses internally the store, it will be available and will work. And then in Twig, it's also simple. You just say, I want this store with this global state, and then I have a component that will use probably this state, and that's it. So it will render some HTML in here or some JavaScript tags, and it will work. This opens also the door to something that we can do only when we are not in JavaScript, which is maybe we have a page that we have components that are written in Twig, for instance, or in PHP, or whatever templating mechanism, and then we have other components in React. And since they share the state, since they share this store, they can be communicating with each other. So they can, for instance, if the user logs in, you can say, hi, John, and then modify probably the page, the main component for John, because they are communicated, even if they are in different parts, isolated parts of the HTML mechanism, which is something nice if you are, for instance, doing a transition from PHP to or Twig to React or things like that. Then, as we have been seeing how people use this and answering issues for some time, there are things that to consider, things that come frequently that you may want or need. The first one is it's very nice to provide, the server provides, apart from the initial state, some kind of context about the page, so about the state of the server, particularly the route that we are browsing. So React on Rails allows this, and also libraries, and if you write your own library, it's very nice to have this in mind, to provide, basically, this context will be something like this. So say, are we in server-side context or not? So the JavaScript part knows it, maybe wants to do some modifications, or in which route, host, everything are we, so we can build the routes, having this information. Otherwise, it's a bit annoying to find out where are we or how to build the routes. Then, for instance, we can use this. In React, we have two different routers. Well, there are many routers, but the main router, which is React router, has two different mechanisms to, at the end, two components to build routes. And one is for server-side rendering, and the other one is based on browser, so it accesses the history and so on of the browser. The other one is going to render an HTML, and it needs the location where we are, but you have to pass it. And you have to say, I'm going to use this static router or this browser router. So it's a way to use this context to simplify your life, because otherwise it's a bit, oh, I have these two routers, and what should I do? Then another thing that comes up every time is how to build the header tags, like titles or the Facebook sharing tags, like these OG tags. So I publish my React library or Vue library, and then people cannot share my content in Facebook because the crawler just arrives there and sees nothing because the title is not changed or the meta, the image of the thing that they want to share is not updated because they are not executing JavaScript at all. So this is typically something you try at the end of the project, and then you find out that you have a problem here because you depend on Facebook. But the solution is quite simple. So there is this library called React Helmet, or in Vue, it's Vue Helmet, done by the NFL, the American Football Association. I like this. And you have this component, Helmet, that you can specify when you're rendering a component, the title or the meta tags, so a chart set or whatever, the Facebook, a lot of stuff in here. And if you use this in client side, it will just update the meta tags for you. So to use this in server-side rendering, Helmet works very well with this. We have a function in a possibility in React on Rails to use this. So instead of rendering a component, we can have a function that, based on the initial state and the context we saw, we can say, I give you an array with the component in HTML and whatever other stuff you may want. So for instance, the title. And Helmet is a library that you can say, after you render the page, please give me the resulting title that you found out that was applied. So this is something that I saw people solving, like doing their own logic in JavaScript to determine, for instance, the descriptions. And for search engine optimization, sometimes the descriptions are quite a big algorithm and so on, and they try to do it as well in PHP, and then you have duplicated code. But with this, you can just take the same and simplify your life. Then you have titles and so on. And in Twig, you can just say render component array, so not the component. So we will receive the array, and not only the component. Then we can use the title property to define the title, and HTML, we can just display it. Then, or also using a store and so on, combination with the other stuff. And then we are kind of ending. The final advice is to make reality checks, because when people are trying, oh, is something happened here? Okay, another reality check. So when people try this, they are typically learning, the team is typically learning how to use React. And although typically every application will work very well in server-side rendering, as you are kind of finding your way into this new state management, state managed library, so where the state is the king of the process and not the document object model, you find that people try to do things as they were used to, and they will work in the client side. Like you can combine in the client side React with jQuery, and it will work, although it's not the cleanest way to do this. But then they try, at the end they say, I know I can, yeah. Well, it's only one slide, but I have to do this again, maybe. Sorry. Well, I can say my word, but yeah, I don't know what's going on here. Well, it's only 2 slides, so I can just say, basically, there are some stuff that we kind of can access in the client side, but in server side we cannot. For instance, I see people trying to do, it's handy, but to do use timers. So set interval, set timeout. This won't work in server side, because also it's very bad practice to make it the server wait or have intervals in there in your JavaScript code. It's something that just has to happen in milliseconds. Then also code that accesses the window document or the window object or document object, or I want the window, I don't know, location, something like that, or document location. That doesn't work. You have other ways to do this. Access to document object manipulation is a no-no. And then do also a first rendering that depends on, for instance, put some weird stuff in the render method that, for instance, makes API calls. So if you find that your server-side rendering code is doing API calls itself, that's obviously a smell. But people, as they try to find their way, their first versions is not the cleanest version as possible, and then they find out that they want to do server-side rendering, their application is working, probably because of lag, but then in server-side rendering it won't work. So the advice is don't wait until the last moment to check if it's working. So try it at the beginning, because otherwise you will find it's also a kind of a reality check to see I'm doing things the clean way, or I'm kind of putting what I know into what I should know. So don't wait until the last moment. And yeah, that's it. So the summary is we saw what is server-side rendering, what is it for, some ways to do it in PHP, the pros and the cons of everyone, some libraries if you want to, I will publish the slides, and if you want to try them or you want to apply these concepts to different technologies, like Vue, Laravel, or if you want to come up with a better library, that's also very welcome as well. That's a nice addition as well. And tips and advices for typical problems you might find that are annoying, but can be solved very easily. But I see sometimes people saying, oh, I tried this, and at the end I wanted to put a title tag, and it was not working, so I have to throw my code away. Well, this is not the case, but people get frustrated because of things like that, and then they have easy solutions. And yeah, that's it. So this is a thank you slide. And if you have questions or